Adolf Hitler is one of the most enigmatic and studied figures in history. Not only was he responsible for the most brutal crimes ever committed, but he knew how to conquer the minds and wills of hundreds of thousands of people. The intrigue is how a failed artist managed to transform himself into an expert speaker and a fierce leader. Since his youth, his family and friends noticed that he was different, but what does that really mean? Was he a genius of superior intelligence? Or an egomaniacal psychopath with a Messianic complex? Maybe he was a terrifying combination of all those qualities. In this new installment of military history, we propose to immerse ourselves in the Führer's psyche to understand why everyone thought that he was a different person from the rest. Join us on this turbulent journey through one of the darkest minds in history. On April 20th, 1889, around 6:30 p.m., Adolf Hitler was born into a working-class family from Braunau, Austria. After 2 days, he was baptized by Father Ignaz Probst, like almost all the children born in that town. There was nothing eminently special about that infant. However, his mother, Clara Hitler, knew that her son was special even from a young age. A little-known detail about the Führer's parents is that they were related. Clara and Alois were second cousins who married and had half a dozen children. Unfortunately for the couple, only Adolf and his sister Paula managed to survive childhood. One of the peculiarities of the young Hitler is that he did not speak with an Austrian accent, despite being born in Braunau. During his youth, German was the most widely spoken dialect in Lower Bavaria. Austrian nationality at that time was the subject of controversy. Many inhabitants of that region felt like cultural brothers of the German provinces due to a long common history. That was the future Nazi leader's first identification with German identity. Thanks to the magic of cinema, and more particularly the documentary works of the Lumiere brothers, we can take a look at the world in which the Führer grew up. These are the streets of Vienna, capital of Austria, in the year 1896, a multifaceted and constantly growing place. At that time, Adolf Hitler was a child of just 7 years old, and the world around him was already beginning to shape his dark vision. According to Adolf Hitler himself, his father was a cold and distant man. They did not love each other, and their relationship had a high degree of violence. According to Paula, the patriarch was brutal with his brother, inflicting daily beatings for the slightest transgression. To make matters worse, the children of the family had not been able to make lasting friends. Due to constant changes of residence, the Führer's childhood was spent in various towns until the family finally settled stably on the outskirts of Linz. There began the school problems that accompanied him throughout his youth. The future Führer had to repeat his first year of high school due to poor grades. The boy's Austrian teachers remembered him as a skinny, pale young man. Lonely. He was not particularly bright, but his academic problems raised eyebrows as he demonstrated talent and interest. The problem was in his attitude. He was rebellious and liked to fight back. According to his French teacher, young Hitler did not enjoy work, which is why he ended up failing many subjects. The tutor describes him as an extravagant and withdrawn child, but also with signs of great intellectual capacity. After a few years of tranquility, the family suffered a severe blow in 1903. when Patriarch Alois Hitler died of a sudden cardiac arrest. The man left his children and his wife the modest savings that he had saved during all those years. This increased the young man's school problems, so he was sent to a state school 40 kilometers from his house. There things followed the same course. Teachers surprised by Adolf Hitler's poor academic performance. Let's briefly review his school bulletin from 1904. German disapproved, geography and history approved, mathematics disapproved, physics approved. Freehand drawing, very good. Sports, excellent. In these notes, it is possible to distinguish what the interests of the future National Socialist leader were. The study of the past was fascinating to him, since in those stories and myths, there was a majestic and delirious idea of what a great Germany could become. At the same time, sport was important to maintain a body free of excess and ready for war. Many experts have tried to analyze this stage of Adolf Hitler, warning that it is a formative age where the first personal conflicts appear. Various theorists have asserted that the foundations of his crusade against the Allies were not really the establishment of a glorious Third Reich that would last 1,000 years and bring glory to Germany. Instead, he was motivated by something more primitive that all humans have felt at least once throughout his life: envy. The Führer always demonstrated an unresolved dissatisfaction with his person. That frustration was applied from the most intimate to the most general. If the German culture he loved was humiliated by French, British, and Russian forces, that was also a humiliation to him as an individual. No photograph of Adolf Hitler survives from that time. Many high school classmates argue that he was a strange young man who preferred privacy and did not enjoy having his photo taken, even in relaxed contexts. All we have left is this profile portrait taken by a classmate named Sturmlechner. After many attempts, Adolf Hitler ended up abandoning secondary education. For 2 years he lived on his mother's pension and his father's modest inheritance, without doing anything of interest. His family and friends saw him as a passionless, lazy person, a person incapable of achieving his goals. After that sabbatical period, Hitler asked his mother for permission and money to travel to Vienna to try out at the School of Fine Arts. This is one of the best known and studied chapters in the life of the National Socialist leader. The fact that one of the most ruthless criminals and murderers in history dreamed of being an artist presents a series of very interesting contradictions. Was he a sensitive subject, or did he simply adore the technical and perfectionist aspect of classical art? Was he talented, or was he a mediocre painter with too much ego to take classes? We can only think of hypothetical answers to these interesting questions. As you probably know, Hitler was rejected from art school after passing the first admission test. According to historians and specialists, he was not a bad painter, but his work lacked originality and boldness. Those elements could well have been improved with years of study and dedication, but again, Hitler had trouble accepting his own limitations, and therefore, listening to people in positions of authority who could teach him something. Before continuing, let's look at some of the paintings the Führer made during his youth. Rejection from art school was followed by another hard blow for Adolf and his sister Paula, the death of their mother due to what was then diagnosed as swelling. It was probably some type of cancer that ate away at the matriarch for months. Adolf spent that period caring for the woman, dedicating every minute of his life to ensuring the health of one of the few people for whom he expressed genuine affection. After several years with temporary jobs painting postcards, Adolf Hitler decides to leave Austria to avoid mandatory military service. His destination is a city that fascinated him years ago, Munich. Shortly thereafter, on June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. Thus fell the first piece of that domino known as the First World War. According to what was written in his book, Mein Kampf, when the conflict broke out, Hitler knelt and thanked the heavens for being part of that historic moment. This personality trait of his became more and more accentuated over the years, and as he rose in German politics, he felt that the universe was conspiring in his favor, that he had a glorious destiny written for him, and that he alone had to claim it. But first, there was a brutal war to fight, the largest the planet had known up to that point. The First World War began on July 28, 1914. Like millions of civilians, Adolf Hitler was recruited to fight in European fields. After his first combat with the Bavarian Regiment, the young man was promoted to corporal. That would be his only military achievement during the conflict, not for lack of merit, but because he himself rejected other promotions. A new rank would have involved relocation and working with new colleagues, and the young Führer was very comfortable with the regiment staff. It was the first time in 25 years that the Austrian did not feel lonely. He was part of something bigger, a kind of family united by the defense of German values. It is for feelings like that he thanked heaven on his knees when the war broke out. The First World War was a brutal conflict. The combination of modern weaponry with tactics from the last century resulted in a bloodbath across Europe. In this context, the strict military life and efficient organization of the German army were a pleasant surprise for Adolf Hitler. That unruly child with attention problems felt that he had found a place where discipline and abuse do have a clear purpose. That same philosophy accompanied him for years, and he tried to apply the same toughness when training the soldiers of the Third Reich. Fortunately for historians, some photos of Adolf Hitler with his companions still exist. Although he enjoyed life among his comrades, these captures show him taciturn, serious, and always distant from the rest of the soldiers. His body language seems to express two things at once. On the one hand, the enjoyment of military life. On the other hand, a feeling of deserving more and not being among colleagues who were equal to him. Many members of the Bavarian Regiment remember him as a strange individual, enthusiastic about war, and with a deep contempt for the common people who remain outside the conflict. Adolf Hitler's life took a brutal turn on October 5, 1916, when he was wounded by British artillery. He had to be rushed to the Red Cross Hospital in Belitz, south of Berlin. He remained there until the first months of 1917, when he returned to his work as a messenger, taking advantage of his facility for sports and his good endurance when running. He eventually participated in more direct and dangerous combat missions, for which, in 1918, he was awarded the Iron Cross. It was the most important military decoration that soldiers of their rank within the Imperial German Army could receive. A striking detail is that, During his participation in the First World War, his experience with Jewish superiors was more than positive. The vast majority of his colleagues from that origin had a good relationship with the future National Socialist leader. It is evident that the hatred towards these people has other origins and motivations. What did end up mobilizing the soldiers' psyche was the German defeat. That surrender was a symptom of national weakness, something that Hitler could not tolerate. Over time, he joined extreme right-wing parties that demanded fair treatment with the country, as well as the expulsion of any inhabitant who did not have German blood in his veins. Alliances with university students and former conservative leaders placed the future leader in a privileged position. There were more and more attendees at the meetings, and it was there that the young Austrian discovered that he had an innate talent for speaking in front of people. His arguments were seductive, and his words forceful. He described the party as a completely German and anti-Semitic force. For more than a decade, he continued to accumulate power both in Congress and in the streets, until National Socialism became the main political force in Germany. The Führer's speeches allow us to delve into two fundamental aspects of his personality: egolatry and the Messiah complex. In the different documents preserved about the dictator, it is possible to elucidate that he considered himself an almost divine force, destined to lead Germany. The mission he defended was not valid only for cultural reasons, but was a logical response to natural conditions. He and his people were destined to conquer. It was his divine right to plant the flag throughout Europe to spread the superior culture. The German one. In part, this can be seen as an overcompensation for those feelings of inferiority and inadequacy that Adolf Hitler felt throughout his adolescence. From the beatings of his father to the rejections from art school, each setback in his life accumulated a weight too great for his mind. The only possible response to so much failure had to be grandiloquent, unique, and overwhelming. To stop being that skinny and useless young man, he had to become the savior leader of Germany. Of course, his facility for oratory and the immediate fascination of the German people with his figure contributed to the emergence of these messianic feelings over the years. To commit Hitler's crimes, it is not enough to feel like a deity. People must treat you as such. Another aspect that emerges from this hatred of his own failures is Hitler's contempt for weakness. We are not referring to physical strength, but to something much more comprehensive. The concept of weakness that Nazi Germany built was strongly related to the spiritual, moral, and racial. That is why, at the same time that they were carrying out the extermination of tens of thousands of disabled people, they had leaders with serious health problems or physical deformities. The best-known example is the lame leg of Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister. Despite the contradictions, Hitler always sought to eliminate any trace of weakness within the population. To delve deeper into this point, it is worth remembering that one of the few subjects he passed in high school was precisely sports, where he received the best grades from him. This is why athletic activities and body care were fundamental to National Socialist morality. Unfortunately, these racist delusions burst like a bubble before the Führer's eyes when the African-American runner Jesse Owens won 4 gold medals at the 1936 Berlin Olympic Games. Of course, we are not the first who have tried to create a mental mosaic of the German dictator. In 1943, Harvard psychologist Henry Murray was commissioned by the government to make a mental profile of the leading Axis figure. Of course, the scholar did not have the opportunity to meet his subject, but based on theory, he was able to identify some of the factors that we described to you today. His insecurity, contempt for weakness, his desire to present himself as a messianic figure, and low resistance to failure were the fundamental elements of that analysis. So accurate was Murray's diagnosis that he even predicted the Führer's end. In his work, he maintained that a suicide would not be a strange outcome, taking into account the personality of the Nazi leader. The report was delivered to U.S. intelligence agencies, but was never officially published. In fact, it remained hidden for 60 years until it was discovered in 2005. Such was its value that the author's family ended up licensing the original to the Cornell University Law Library. Those responsible described it as a unique piece to understand the psyche of the great villain of the 20th century. The mind of the leader of Nazism continues to be an object of study. Behind the mystery of his personality and his character, so particular to him, lies a question that challenges all of humanity. How was the brutality that occurred in the mid-20th century possible? After all, trying to understand this different man is a way to make sense of the most abhorrent crimes in history. In this way, we reach the end of the video. If you liked this content about the dark psyche of Adolf Hitler, we invite you to subscribe and activate notifications. Without further ado, we say goodbye until the next installment of Military History.